key attributes of Sofosbuvir, what we learned from this medication specifically from clinical trials, and then we'll conclude with a brief survey. We're going to briefly discuss Canada's drug regulatory process and how drugs enter the market or are approved for consideration on one of Canada's many public health plans. A couple things are worth noting here. CTAC does a brief review of the CDR before every medication webinar, so some of you may be very familiar or have seen this before. Accordingly, I'm going to go very quickly through it, but CTAC is presently designing a standalone video of the CDR process in greater detail. We intend for it to be completed before our next such webinar. Very quickly now, the regulatory approval process begins with Health Canada examining the clinical trial data. It reviews the drug's safety and efficacy as well as its compliance with our food, drug, and safety laws. Health Canada is primarily concerned with efficacy and safety. Is the treatment safe and does it do what it presumes to do? If the treatment in question does comply with these regulations, then this treatment is given a notice of compliance and is permitted to proceed to our other review and regulatory bodies. This notice of compliance gives the manufacturer approval to sell the drug in Canada. Now, this diagram helps explain the drug development, review, and market stages in Canada, and it includes notes that detail how CTAC participates in the process. The industrial experience, the red indicates the Health Canada experience, and the blue line is ever-present vigilance by our regulatory bodies, the public and health professionals. We're always working on exchange tools to make them more useful and useful. This diagram is no exception. While it a little complicated, it is true that the regulatory and review system can be difficult to navigate. Ultimately, CTAC encourages the inclusion of new and effective treatments on public insurance plans. And as we move along that circle, we see CTAC as continually involved in increasing education, disseminating information, and translating knowledge. So while Health Canada decides whether treatment is eligible to be sold in Canada on the free market, it's not the end of the line. There's another process to decide whether a treatment should be listed on a public insurance plan. There are presently 19 public formularies managing public drug plans, 13 representing each province or territory, and 6 separate federal bodies. So Health Canada has decided on a treatment's participation in the market. It's now time for the Common Drug Review, or the CDR, that makes a recommendation or suggestion as to whether a treatment should be listed for public insurance. The CDR is administered by the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technology in Health, whom we'll refer to as CADIT. The manufacturer submits their treatment or drug to the CDR for review. The CDR then evaluates the submission, which includes clinical trial data, product monographs, and input from people who are interested in the treatment. The CDR is trying to decide if the treatment in question is safe, is it effective, and are its costs sensible against other treatments. Does it provide significantly lower cost or significantly better treatment experience? The CDR complements this data with patient input from people like you. So again, the CDR makes a suggestion, but the provinces get to make the final decision for their respective plans. All provinces participate except Quebec, which has its own process. It's reviewed for safety and efficacy. The CDR does the same, but it also reviews the social value of a treatment and whether that qualifies it for inclusion in public drug plans. The CDR has traditionally had a mechanism about a priority review of in question if it significant improvements in efficacy relative to treatment. This is to allow lifesavers to move through the process a little quicker. Now, at present, the CDR priority review process is being reviewed and reformed. We anticipate the revised priority review procedure will look similar, and CTAC has answered CAD's calls for suggestions as to reform. One more time, because we're getting a little bit of feedback, if you don't mind muting your line with *6, please. The Common Drug Review concludes when it makes a suggestion to list the drug for public insurance plans, to not list the drug, to list the drug with conditions, or defer a listing recommendation until information in the submission is clarified. A full and unrestricted listing is uncommon. List with criteria is much more common and establishes the treatment as an option and still allows public drug plans to realize provincial priorities. Do not list at current price requires the manufacturer to submit a new price, largely because the original price was not reconcilable with its social value, or provinces are being recommended to negotiate this price. Do not list means that the drug provides no demonstrable therapeutic benefit beyond what exists on public drug plans presently. So what we're we're doing today, then, is informing you on this new treatment so that you can complete a survey, the results of which we will use to send directly to the CDR to be used in therapy. This will end the portion of our discussion where we look over the CDR. And again, for those of you who are familiar with it, thanks again for your patience. Today, the meat of our discussion is this new HCV medication, Ledipasvir. Sofosbuvir is also marketed as the pill Sovaldi, but this submission is a single pill containing Sofosbuvir and Ledipasvir. It's a once-daily, single-tablet regimen and constitutes 90 milligrams of Ledipasvir and 400 milligrams of Sofosbuvir. It's worth noting here that the pill Sovaldi is actually 400 milligrams as well. So this new medication can rightly be considered as the pill Sovaldi plus 90 milligrams of Ledipasvir in one single pill. Sofosbuvir is a nucleotide analog NS5B polymerase inhibitor, and Ledipasvir is an NS5A inhibitor. Now this just means these are antiviral medications, and specifically they function by otherwise blocking or disrupting viral replication in the body. It stops the virus from being able to replicate quite as quickly in your body. Now these are a part of medications these are a class of medications called direct-acting antivirals. We'll call them DAAs. And these are presently contributing to the sudden and massive improvement in the efficacy and tolerability of HCV treatment. Ledipasvir is an investigational treatment that is presently approved in Canada for experimental use in clinical trials. It is unavailable on the market. Again, Sofosbuvir on its own is Sovaldi, and Sofosbuvir has been reviewed by the CDR. The CDR concluded that Sofosbuvir was an extremely effective HCV medication and suggested that provincial formularies list it for reimbursement. The CDR suggestion also stipulated that present treatment with Sofosbuvir will still include interferon and or ribavirin, depending on the patient's level of fibrosis or experience with past treatment. So as of right now, we're not entirely out of the interferon woods, and you can view our past webinar on Sofosbuvir at ctac.ca. So Sovaldi is available on the Canadian market and is actually covered by more than 90% of Canadian private insurance plans. On public plans, however, Sofosbuvir's availability is still developing as the CDR and provinces continue to deliberate. In Quebec, who you'll recall does not participate in the CDR, Sovaldi has been approved for reimbursement, but its use in treatment is still suggested to include regulated interferon and or ribavirin. In British Columbia, Sovaldi is presently under review by the Ministry of Health and BC Pharmacare, and BC Pharmacare, in fact, has closed its patient input request just this July. In Ontario, Sovaldi is presently under review by the Ministry of Health, and similarly to BC, the Ontario Public Drug Program closed for patient input also in July. Sofosbuvir has really changed the HCV treatment landscape in that it has repeatedly demonstrated sustained virologic response of well over 90% of participants, whether at 12 weeks or 24 weeks. And some data has suggested that its efficacy can be extremely in as quick as 8 weeks. A sustained virologic response, or SVR, is indicative of a cure. Sofosbuvir also has relatively minimal and fewer side effects compared to other treatments. It's considered well tolerated and has few barriers to resistance, as well as few known drug interactions. It's presently indicated for use in the treatment of genotypes 1, 2, 3, and 4, though presently still includes pegylated interferon or ribavirin in most prescriptions. Now this is the controversial $1,000 pill that you may have read about. You may have heard that a full course of treatment costs around $84,000. In some regions, this price has been negotiated down. In some regions, this price has not been negotiated at all. So that's very worth keeping in mind. In May of this year, Dr. Robert Myers reported in the Canadian Journal of Gastroenterology as many as 50% of chronic HCV sufferers are intolerant to pegylated interferon or otherwise ineligible to receive it. This echoes the prevailing momentum in HCV medication development, which is moving away from interferon. So while Sofosbuvir, which is again the pill Sovaldi, is itself interferon-free, it's presently only to be prescribed with interferon or ribavirin. This new fixed-dose combination of Ledipasvir Sofosbuvir, however, is being an interferon-free, ribavirin-free medication. Again, this is a once-daily pill that's a fixed-dose combination of 400 milligrams of Sofosbuvir and 90 milligrams of Ledipasvir. So with that in mind, anything we can say about Sofosbuvir, we can carry over to say about Ledipasvir Sofosbuvir. And this will come up again later as we review clinical data. And again, you're all welcome and encouraged to review the previous CTAC webinar concerning Sofosbuvir. Some of the things we know about Sofosbuvir as far as known side effects include fatigue, low red blood cells, low white blood cells, headache, insomnia, nausea, depression, irritability, and when paired with ribavirin, parents should note that ribavirin is associated with rash or dermatological events. On the other hand, is an experimental drug approved for use only in clinical trials. Trials have used Ledipasvir paired with another DAA to review its ability to increase efficacy of the drug. Now, this is another product from Gilead Sciences. Both components of this treatment are owned by the same company. We have no word whatsoever on the cost of Ledipasvir, or indeed the cost of Ledipasvir-Sofosbuvir combination. But given the pricing discussion happening regarding Sovaldi, we can anticipate that the cost of this treatment will be higher than market average, and quite possibly even more expensive than Sovaldi, which again is the infamous $1,000 pill. Now, Ledipasvir-Sofosbuvir submission to the Common Drug Review is based on the following studies: the National Institute of Health Synergy Studies, the Lone Star Study, the Electron series of studies, and the ION series of studies. Now, these are proof-of-concept studies showing the efficacy of the treatment and isolating how the effects of adding Ledipasvir to Sofosbuvir differ from the effects of adding ribavirin, pegylated interferon, or both. The ION series also specifically looks to refine expectations, see if a shorter treatment regimen is at all possible. Let's begin with the Synergy study. This is a proof-of-concept study to show that Sofosbuvir plus any other DAA can demonstrate at least the same, if not better, effects than Sofosbuvir plus ribavirin and or pegylated interferon. Again, this is part of a grand movement away from ribavirin and pegylated interferon, and Synergy is one of the first studies to really delve into making that distinction. The baseline characteristics of the participants in this study include some of the most challenging patients to treat. This includes those with a high viral load, those with some measure of liver fibrosis, people with past non-response to treatment, as well as some of the more tricky sociocultural demographics. Most participants were Black, most participants were men, many were known to not respond well to pegylated interferon. You can see by evaluating the arms of this study that we're comparing Ledipasvir-Sofosbuvir on its own in Group 1 against Groups 2 and 3, who are using two new unnamed DAAs. Now, the investigators here would already have access to the data of Sofosbuvir plus or minus ribavirin, and that's what the investigators are comparing against. Again, you'll notice there are experimental drugs used here, GS-9669, for example. The GS stands again for Gilead Sciences. So this is Gilead comparing their own drugs and not looking at other manufactured drugs. The Synergy results are here, and they're pretty good. We see 95% SVR here at the lowest level. In fact, some data suggest that SVR was achieved in as little as 2 weeks with one of the experimental drugs, GS-9451. Now, the end line for this trial was 12 weeks of treatment, but as noted above, the viral suppression appeared to be extremely fast. By day 14, that's just 2 weeks, there were good indicators of an SVR in most participants. So what are our results? Are very impressive, considering that it involved some of the hardest to treat populations. Many of the participants would not have responded well to pegylated interferon, so this shows, as the study intended, that there is proof of principle that DAAs can work without pegylated interferon or ribavirin. Again, in Canada, Sofosbuvir prescriptions include pegylated interferon or ribavirin, depending on your condition. But this study proves it need not be that way, and this promoted further investigation into the removal of pegylated interferon and ribavirin. Further, the treatment was considered to be well tolerated, extremely effective, and very safe. Now let's look at the Electron series of studies, and this would be Electrons 1 and 2. Now that we know that Ledipasvir-Sofosbuvir is effective, safe, and ultimately better than pegylated interferon and ribavirin, the Electron series looks to see how this specific combination of DAAs will compare against other combination DAAs. In order to do this, the Electron series rightly selected a very diverse patient population for investigation. Some parents were experienced, some naive, some cirrhotic, some not. The only real common variable here is that they're all suffering Now, there were seven arms across these studies, and for me, the most interesting ones are groups 4 through 7. This is because it's in these arms that we're really seeing the results of adding or removing ribavirin, and we're specifically addressing people with significant liver damage who have had negative responses in the past. So 4 through 7, again, these are extremely hard to treat groups. And here are the results. Again, interesting conclusions to draw here, including what impact ribavirin really has. And specifically at groups 4 through 7, we've got some great results. But some of these numbers, groups 6 and 7, for example, do have an SVR that requires trouble. The data in group 6 is reflective of 30% of respondents not achieving SVR. And that's due to one case of relapse, one case of loss to follow-up, and one failure to achieve SVR 12. Group 7, by contrast, lost some participants to adverse events associated with ribavirin and not Ledipasvir sofosbuvir. For example, ribavirin is associated, as we've said, with dermatological events and can sometimes cause enough to necessitate a hospital visit. So let's crunch this data up and come up with a summary statement. We've now got proof that Ledipasvir sofosbuvir is not only better than past treatment, but much more tolerable. Electron 1 shows that adding ribavirin to Ledipasvir sofosbuvir might be preferable and more effective for cirrhotic patients with a history of non-response. Because of this, Electron 2 was carried out, so investigators could better isolate and identify the reasons why. At the conclusion of the studies, we see data suggesting that adding ribavirin to Ledipasvir sofosbuvir does, in fact, perform better in patients with some level of cirrhosis and in multiple genotypes 1 and 3. So we conclude then that Ledipasvir sofosbuvir is safe, well-tolerated, fast, and effective in comparison to other treatments. However, depending on your level of liver damage or your treatment experience history, a response-guided therapy may still involve ribavirin. Let's look at the Lone Star study. This is an interesting one. It's very similar to Electron series of studies and with a similar mandate. Let's compare Ledipasvir sofosbuvir on its own as a fixed-dose combination against other combinations. Even more interesting, perhaps, is that Lone Star also looked to build upon synergy in Electron by seriously evaluating treatment duration time and whether or not we could start looking at SVR in as few as 8 weeks. Here we have the arms involved. Most interesting here for me would be groups 1. They're all treatment-naive, non-cirrhotics, so not really our normally considered difficult populations. However, they're all being tested on an 8-week treatment, which is fascinating. So this then looks at something of a first-line response to a first-diagnosed HCV sufferer. Again, there are some really impressive results here. The suggestions are that 8 weeks might work for a cure. The safety profile looks extremely good, and like Electron, most of these losses are not statistically significant. Again, the adding of ribavirin is helpful in research, but another participant dropped out due to side effects associated with the ribavirin. We know ribavirin is still a part of how sofosbuvir is prescribed, but it's still unclear how the CDR will decide if and how ribavirin will be involved in a treatment involving Ledipasvir sofosbuvir. So what are our takeaways here from Lone Star? One of the takeaway messages, I think, is that Ledipasvir is an effective cure for hepatitis C genotype 1, regardless of treatment history, regardless of liver damage. Now, this echoes earlier trial findings as well, but Lone Star helps further focus trial objectives into evaluating the impact of ribavirin and whether or not the treatment duration can be reduced to as little as 8 weeks. And the last study we'll look at is the ION series. This is a series of studies that have built upon some of the conclusions of other studies done in this specific field. The variables we're evaluating in these studies, ION 1, ION 2, and ION 3, are determining the efficacy of Ledipasvir sofosbuvir with or without ribavirin, and whether this efficacy is improved or maintained at 24, 12, and even 8 weeks. So we've really got the focus narrowed. These studies, even more than their predecessors, really identify and isolate variables of ribavirin, so we can see if we can eliminate ribavirin entirely and reduce treatment duration to 8 weeks. Now at this point, just as an aside, I think it's very important to acknowledge that in a not-too-distant past, hepatitis C treatment involved regular injections and a treatment duration of up to 1 year in most cases. And even then, we're looking at SVRs of 60 to 80%. So we've really, it's worlds apart from past treatment. Now here we see the arms of the ION studies. Now the ION studies are so similar and designed to feed into one another, so we thought it most prudent to present the data together. The important distinctions here are that all arms are evaluating whether or not we need ribavirin, whether patients are treatment experienced or naive. And ION 3 specifically looks at the same while controlling for time, seeking to prove that an 8-week duration is effective. It's also positive to see the samples here. Very well varied participants, over 100 people in each, and in 1 and 3 we've got over 200 participants. And here are the ION. Right away, ION 1 and ION 2 are showing at least 94% SVR in all groups, 12 weeks or 24 weeks. So again, we're seeing what we've been seeing with Ledipasvir Sofosbuvir, extremely effective across many different populations. Now, interestingly, in the ION 3 group at 8 weeks of treatment, we're seeing a low of 93% and an average of 95% SVR. So this is the first indication that this treatment might actually be effective in as few weeks for just about anyone. I can tell you candidly that since the ION series, I've seen early data and trial proposals to evaluate Sofosbuvir and or Ledipasvir for treatment at 4 or 6 weeks. So we really are quickly in treatment here. Very interesting things are developing. And as an aside, about 2 weeks ago at the American Association for Study Disease Conference in New York, there were some very promising presentations made about work being done on new treatments, new molecules, and extreme durations. Again, looking at 2, 4, and 6 weeks. So let's summarize what we're looking at here from the ION studies. There's still some that we need to re-examine ribavirin. Some data suggest that people with cirrhosis perform better with ribavirin present. Further, ION 2 suggests that we cannot significantly shorten the treatment durations for cirrhotics or people who have not responded to treatment in the past. We're looking at slightly longer treatments for those with liver damage, which is an intuitive conclusion considering the other studies. So ribavirin might be a good addition to this therapy when we're looking at more difficult to treat populations, and specifically those with cirrhosis. Ultimately, however, Ledipasvir Sofosbuvir did extremely well. An SVR of 94 to 99% is extremely good, and this SVR is consistent among all HCV genotype 1 patients and after only 12 weeks. And here's the big conclusion from ION 3. It looks like we do have a high SVR associated with 8 weeks of treatment. Specifically, we're looking at people undergoing the first time or very little liver damage. Whether with or without ribavirin, this SVR is positive, and it doesn't look like adding ribavirin or extending treatment duration is associated with a better cure rate. So again, for cirrhotics, liver damage, absolutely. We're talking about a longer treatment and still ribavirin. But ION 3 is looking at treatment inexperienced, like treatment naive people with little liver damage or none at all, where 8 weeks ribavirin seems very possible. And as I mentioned earlier, there are early stage trials looking at 2, 4, 6-week numbers, and many of these trials include Ledipasvir Sofosbuvir. Most include Sofosbuvir at some level, and many are comparing new experimental DAAs and how their addition can improve treatment. We're still some time away from seeing those result conclusions, however. So we can close the book on whether Ledipasvir Sofosbuvir is effective. It's very effective. As Ledipasvir is still investigational, we don't know a lot about its adverse effects or its drug interactions. So far, trial data suggests that it's extremely tolerable and it does not cause adverse events we haven't been able to attribute to Sofosbuvir or ribavirin. We have more data on Sofosbuvir, of course, as it's the oldest and it's already on the market. We know that Sofosbuvir can interact with some anticonvulsants, some antimicrobacterials. We know that and wort do not get along, and some protease inhibitors, which are a class of antivirals, and some ACE meds may affect the efficacy of Sofosbuvir. Specifically, there's some data to suggest Tiprevir, ritonavir, and may interact negatively. As for overall benefits, this treatment has many. Due to being a once-daily fixed-dose combination treatment, we can assume higher adherence. This causal link has been established in many, many trials, which suggests making treatment easier to take and tolerate contributes directly to a patient's ability to adhere to that treatment. The thing about Sofosbuvir is the fact that it has a broad indication for HCV. we can access harder-to-treat populations as well as treatment-naive patients and several genotypes. And ultimately, this new treatment brings us closer to the interferon ribavirin-free era we're looking for. And this helps establish a standard for treatment that is very safe and well tolerated. And now, as I promised, I intend to turn the task to you. As discussed, the CDR wants to hear from patients. They'd love to know what you think of the treatment and how it compares to other treatments, or how it will impact people with HCV or their caretakers. To see if you consider it safe, more tolerable, more effective. Even those who have no experience with this treatment have valuable insight to offer. So please, regardless of your treatment history, we'd love to hear your thoughts. This is to the federal agency responsible. Now, for those of you who are looking for more information or to expand upon what we've discussed today, there's some helpful links here. Also, to repeat, you are encouraged to visit ctac.ca to view some of our webinars, all of which go into a more exhaustive explanation of the CDR. And again, CTAC is presently developing a standalone video that will break down the CDR process further and in lay terms. So at this point, I would love to answer questions. I'll start with a disclaimer that I can't answer questions. But if I do not have an answer ready at hand, I will tell you some. For example, some trial data is considered intellectual property and cannot be shared within the ethical standards of Health Canada. Furthermore, with Ledipasvir specifically, this is an investigational drug that has all the appearance of being very safe, but I do not have complete access, as it is a very investigational drug. So with that in mind, please let me know if anyone has any questions. Elizabeth, go ahead. You may need to your mic, Elizabeth, to participate. And of course, that's #6 to unmute your line.
Does that work?
Yeah, I can hear you. Is that Elizabeth?
Yes, it's Elizabeth.
Hi, go ahead.
Okay, so your name's Adam Cook, and you're a researcher at the CTAC?
That's correct.
And your CTAC is not part of Gilead?
No, not at all.
Okay, well, I can tell you something really interesting. I've got hepatitis C, but it's probably gone now. And I have been taking I'm on the last week and a half of an off-label prescription of Sofosbuvir, Ledipasvir. And it cured my hepatitis in 3 weeks. 0 side effects.
That's actually very interesting to note. In fact, it's worth discussing the question around some of these drugs. In fact, there was a lot of evidence suggesting Sofosbuvir with other companies' medications in combination, off-label use, was extremely effective. Now, from a corporate perspective, I think they had decided they didn't want to necessarily collaborate with another corporation. So Ledipasvir, in fact, is a very similar molecule to other molecules used in off-label use. So it is unaffiliated. We receive funding from the Health Agency of Canada. We also receive some funding from pharmaceutical companies. But that being said, we're strictly interested in access to medications through Canadian regulatory bodies. So we're not necessarily afraid to investigate or examine those links, but what up is very interesting because that actually is the off-label combination whose success was so marked that Gilead decided a similar molecule and put that out there. Does that make any sense? It actually reinforces your experience.
Yeah, I get it. And what it is Ledipasvir is half the price of the Sofosbuvir. And Sofosbuvir, what I understand, it used to be owned by Pharmasset, and when Gilead bought Pharmasset, they doubled the price. Correct on that?
Tough to say, and again, a lot of pricing negotiations with corporate manufacturers I don't have access to. I can certainly have opinions about it, but I don't necessarily know exactly how a price comes up to, or even what the costs are behind it. it is true that Sovaldi, which is Sofosbuvir, has been extremely contentious. It's made headlines in the world simply because it has such a high cure rate, but it's priced extremely high relative to other treatments for hepatitis C. So you've made a very good point, and it stands to be discussed because still in the world, different governments are engaging in negotiations with the manufacturer to get this price down. So, negotiated a lower price. I know Egypt negotiated a lower price. It's not unusual for large pharmaceutical companies to reduce prices in the developing world or in countries that are dealing with massive epidemics. Now, Egypt is dealing with an epidemic of hepatitis, so that certainly makes sense. But I can't necessarily comment on how those prices are arriving, but you're certainly not in the minority as far as people who consider that price contentious.
Well, a study in England that revealed the cost to manufacture 12 weeks of Sovaldi was approximately $250. Now, I know there's R&D involved. I know I'm very grateful I've incurred to a really great medical plan I'm on, but it's really tough for other people. I'm sorry that I'm talking so much, but I have to leave for work. Let me tell you who I am, because I'm really concerned about this issue. My name's. Because of my experience with hepatitis C, I've written a book about it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And
you can email me your contact information because, again, we're still on a public webinar. So if you
it's that. Encouraging anybody. It's Elizabeth Rains. If you can find me online, I'd love to hear from you, because I'm really concerned that I've talked to other people with Hep C, and they've been unable to get, the Sovaldi with the interferon treatment or anything because they don't have the health plans. So I'm going to say goodbye and thank you so much for all the information, and I'll get in touch with you.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Now, for those of us who are still on the line, of course, if anyone else has any questions, I'd be welcome to address those. And if no further questions, then what I'll do is I'll direct you back to the screen where you'll see there's a link to the Sofosbuvir input survey that we're delivering. Again, and I hate to be redundant, but I can't overstress it enough. Participate in this survey. Even if you have someone who hasn't viewed this webinar, it'll be up at .ca recorded for your viewing. Anyone who possibly can very exciting data for the common drug review. So once again, please try to take time to complete that survey, and thanks again for your attention and for your time today. We'll let you know when we have our next webinar to consult patients for input. Thanks again. Have a good day.
The leader has disconnected.